Okay, so the last thing you were talking about was Camp 211. I didn't hear you say that this area was called Queen Maudlin. Am I saying that correctly? Is that affiliated with it? Is that relevant?
The larger area, okay,
Okay.
Antarctica is divided up into national areas, and Neuschwabenland is in the section that in English we call it Queen Maud's Land, and it belongs to, I believe, Denmark or one of the Scandinavian countries, but the Germans took it over. At that point, they had occupied the country that owned it, so they just took it. Isn't that what colonizers do? I mean, we
So
have we
Hitler,
have a long history of that.
yes, overthrowing Hitler pushed out the aristocracy, replaced them with Jesuits. The aristocracy, the German or Prussian aristocracy, fled down to Antarctica. And then from Antarctica, they went to the moon. And these are the people that had to cut deals with for real estate on the moon.
Yes,
Okay,
they
so the
they
Nazis
had
didn't get into outer space, just to be clear. The German aristocracy did. Or,
exactly. Now they still wore German uniforms and they still wore the traditional German symbols. So to someone from modern day America looking at them, they would look like Nazis, but they aren't. They're actually more like the historical Teutonic Knights.
with the spurs
Some of the
and the hats that have the,
yes, with the spurs and everything.
and
So
these are the people that worship the black sun and choose to drink the goo. Am I correct? That are also on Mars.
uh, they're a part of the mix.
Okay. So how did they get to the moon? Can we talk about those specifics from Queen Maudlin? How did we get to the moon? How did we get to another planet, if you will?
In Hanabu, they're basically saucer-shaped ships, and they operate with electrogravitic. I have trouble pronouncing that word. Um, Antigrav engines. They're similar to Schauberger's Repulsina engine. They use red mercury and they give off extreme amounts of radioactivity, and the crews all died from radiation poisoning. But that's how they got out there. And the ETs out there, the mantids in particular, and this is a race of intelligent insects, took pity on them. They said, if these folks are that motivated to get off their world, we're going to help them. And so they made some sort of a deal to lease them regen tanks, regeneration technology, and it's based on black goo. The Americans don't use it, but the Germans do. The black goo in the tank has had its sentience removed, and so it's back to being just basically nanobots. It's no longer it's no longer a life form. It's basically just a tool at that point.
Okay.
But the Americans don't trust it because the original thing was a life form, a rather dangerous one.
If we
Black is dangerous, very dangerous.
Well, it brings me to my next peripheral point. Before we start talking too much about the inner workings of the Hanabu, the generations of Hanabu, and first getting on the moon, if we could talk about, I heard one of these guys in the British Royal Army or whatever. Oh Jesus, Daniel, heard you were recording with Penny. Um, said that they were at the Falkland Islands and Thule Island or Sandwich Island, or whatever. There was a cave, and inside the cave, it was colder than the outside, and that this cave had a whole bunch of blue boxes or cases with writing on it. And one of they were told to that uh, the United Kingdom shelled the island till the Argentinians left. Went in the cave with the British Royal Guard or whatever, took all the boxes, sent it to Marconi in London or United Kingdom, and
Uh-huh.
that one of the guys, they're all instructed not to open the boxes, but one of the guys opened the blue boxes, and he said that he saw black goo and it started to like rise up towards him, and then he just shut the case. Is any of that true? Is all that bullshit? Is this guy lying? He said he's been threatened.
That's consistent with what I know about them.
Can
I
you
don't know that particular story.
do what?
I don't know that particular story.
Okay.
I do know that there is a deposit of black goo in the Falkland Islands on the island that they call Tula. Thule. And that is the right way to say it, is Tula.
Okay. Okay.
And that's what they're fighting over, is that deposit of black goo, because it has outrageous technical possibilities. But the stuff is sentient. It's self-aware, it's intelligent, and it has an agenda of its own. So if you're going to use it, you have to take the sentience out. You have to actually kill what you're working with. And the Germans didn't kill it when they had us drink it. No. And yes, when I was out there, I drank it because my job out there had so much responsibility to it and so many things that I had to keep track of at once. The black goo made me capable of doing the job at the level it needed to be done.
Having
So
everything
for me,
in your head, right? That way there's not another Philadelphia experiment instance.
yes, my job was to make sure that we went into hyperspace and came out with nobody in the wall, nobody in the floor, and nobody stuck inside boxes or something else. That life forms were separate from inorganic walls and things. That was my job. Now, when you're on a ship with 20 people, a human could probably do it on their own. But when you're operating as the navigator for 20 ships and each one has 10,000 people, you can't do that by yourself. And the black goo enables that. So it was required for the job. Now, what it does is it doubles or triples your IQ within an hour or two. And whether it's double or triple depends on your own genetics. It takes care of your health issues. While you have it, you are healthy. You don't have to go into regen all the time unless for some reason you get something chopped off. All of your psychic abilities are enhanced, but it comes at the price of your emotions. The only emotion you're left with is anger. And you use that to make your psychic abilities work.
Okay. Before we get too deep into Black Goo, if we could backpedal out and then scooch back up the different generations of the Hanabu into what they have now.
Okay, they did, I believe it was 6 generations of Hanabu. And then in the late 70s, early 80s, they started building the cigar-shaped ships, and they had a new engine that wasn't as radioactive. It used a plasma, and the plasma would be vented to the outside of the ship so that it would glow. They were made out of aluminum. They were basically submarines that could go into space, and they were used for transporting materials, people, slaves, equipment, trade. So they were more used for stuff rather
We
than,
do this at Diego Garcia.
yeah. Um,
Other points,
and then I didn't hear that.
any other points where they meet with here, make contact besides Diego Garcia?
Antarctica. When I was in Nachtwaffen, we were told that Earth was dead, that there had been a cobalt war.
Yeah.
Unless you were on a ship that was going back and forth to Earth, you didn't know. Now, I've had German people ask me why they were left behind. They were left behind because Germany, the country, signed surrender, unconditional surrender. Legally, they couldn't be taken. So you've got a situation where the German nation is subservient to the United States and the other allies. And at the same time, the United States and the allies are subservient to the Germans in space because the Germans in space won Operation High Jump. And it's screwy, but it's the way it works. And the Germans in space left the Allies with the illusion that they had won the war, on the condition that all of the important stuff, the corporations, the agencies, the government groups, they all have a German on the board. And you can go through and check this. They were the foundation of Operation Paperclip, which brought in all the Germans into all of the technology in the United States. Now, I still haven't found the paperwork behind it, but things in the United States changed dramatically in 1947 after Operation High Jump. Haven't found the paperwork, but it has to be because the Germans in space took over. Neuschwabenland runs the place politically. So you've got this. So you've got this Anunnaki who owns the earth, and you've got these humans that are now in space that are telling the humans here what to do. So you've got both and they're not working together.
Well, speaking of this Oberkommando, who makes up that?
Oberkommando is the military of the space force out there. They call their military Nachtwaffen, which is space fleets, and it's like the heads of the joint forces,
So it's their version of the Pentagon?
Huh?
It's their version. It's the Ares Prima version of the Pentagon.
Yeah. It's the Germans in space version of the Pentagon. And they're telling They only interfere whenever the Americans do something stupid. Well, in the 1980s, the Americans got stupid. They started interacting with tall whites who are blue collar Anunnaki from Mars. And the tall whites helped the Americans create their own SSP in order to take World War II back out into space because they were chafing under Oberkommando.
Tell me everything you know about tall whites, if we could. Why would you say they're the blue collar version of the Anunnaki? Why would you give that analogy?
Because they are.
I know that, but if you could go into depth about that. No, no, no. Yeah, it's not that I'm questioning you. I'm just saying, can you just break that down for us?
Okay, the Anunnaki are a ET race, and their god their royals are the ones that we call their gods. Okay, so they have a royal class, and then they have a blue collar class, and the royals use Ormus and they use blood products to be able to have these extremely long lives. Their blue collar don't. They have their natural life is about 400 years, and that's all that the tall whites live. They are about our size until they get to 300, 350 years old, and then they suddenly get real tall. And that's why they're called tall whites. And they have a hip dysplasia problem. And they walk funny because of it. And they have psychic abilities and they can do things. They can pick things up and move them around with their mind. They can make you think whatever you want. But they don't heal well if they get injured. So they're terrified that we're going to cut them where they get an injury that won't heal for months, and then they'll get infected because Earth has bacteria. And so they're paranoid about us touching them. They know that our space program involves kidnapped children, so they're extremely paranoid about us being between them and their kids because reproduction is more difficult for them than it is for us. And especially since they've had so many nuclear wars on their home world, they have very low reproduction rates. And so they really, really value the kids they are able to have. And they think we don't because they know the space programs are manned by kidnapped children. So I've mentioned that to people. Well, we love our children. You couldn't prove that to an ET if you wanted to, because they know these programs are all manned by kidnapped children.
You talked about Anunnaki royal blood products for extending their life. Can you talk about that?
I don't have detailed information about it.
Just
This
what
was
you know.
this was this was okay. They don't do adrenochrome. Adrenochrome is poisonous to Anunnaki. It's the Draco that do the adrenochrome. But they use something from blood plasma, and I'm not sure what it is, but they use it to extend their own lives. It's basically the same thing as the rich people that are using children's blood in transfusions, something like that. I don't know the details.
Okay, well, let's talk about my next thing was dialing in. It's a frequency. It's a time travel or to go back in time when the Raptors killed a whole bunch of German kids or something. That was an episode we talked about. Can we talk about
Yeah.
how everything is a frequency, or I don't know if I'm saying any of this right, but
Uh, it's time travel and it's based on if you have the coordinates, you can go to any space, any place and time in history if you have the coordinates. But if you're going backwards in time, because of quantum mechanics and the interference of the observer, you will find what you expect to find rather than what was objectively true. That was a real problem for the Montauk groups because you find what you expect to find. You don't find what really happened because of the influence of the consciousness of the observer.
okay. Thank you for that.
That's why, okay, Stuart Swerdlow talked about that he was sent back to get blood from Jesus on the cross. There's no objective proof that Jesus was ever on the cross. And yet, when Stuart went back, he found him because he expected to find him. That's been a standard thing with both Montauk and the chronovisor.
Yes. Okay.
You go back in time, you find what you expect to find. You go forward in time, and if you have a certain outcome in mind, you'll find that too. Not and since in parallel timelines, everything that is possible happens, you'll end up in the wrong place.
Before we get too deep into that, I wanted to ask your opinion. I know this is cheese dick as fuck, but Indiana Jones, is that soft disclosure, the Ark, Holy Grail, the Crystal Skulls?
Everything in sci-fi is soft disclosure.
Okay. Who do these directors and Steven Spielberg and all these people, who do they get all these ideas from? And who's given permission
That would be from someone in the Pentagon.
in the Pentagon? Okay. Let's see. So we talked about that. Okay, this might be a dumb question, but how many planets are there in the solar system?
Depends on how you define planet.
Okay. Um,
If
yeah.
we're talking about things bigger than the moon, yeah,
Is there anything past Pluto? Is there anything closer than Mercury to the sun? Is there anything in between we're just not allowed to know?
there's nothing planet sized, as in bigger than Mercury, that you don't already know about until you get to the Kuiper Belt. Okay, the Kuiper Belt is a spherical thing made up of dust and rocks, and Pluto actually dips into it, and for a short part of its orbit, and then further out there is something called the Oort cloud,
Yeah.
OORT, and they're both spherical. They're both built from rock and ice. Some of the rocks are planet sized, Pluto size or bigger. To me, They appear to be a Dyson sphere that's in disarray. A Dyson sphere is a constructed thing meant to protect a star's system.
Yes.
And that's what they look like to me, but I've not been told that.
If they were leaked Dyson sphere, if you just had to guess shooting from the hip.
If I had to shoot from the hip, I would say it was a Dyson sphere that's a billion years old.
Okay. Let's talk about what do you know about Little St. James Island?
I know that Epstein owns it. I know that there is a temple there to Moloch. I know that Moloch requires blood sacrifices. Um, I know that a large portion of not our national elites, but the international elites worship Moloch. And I don't want to talk about that because people were killed when I did.
Sorry to go there. It was just one of my bullet points.
Um, yeah, guys, the last time I talked about that, 5 people were killed.
We don't have
So
to, Penny. Don't worry about it. I'll scratch it off right now. Okay, moving on. What about the ether? I wanted to know about the ether, why we're not allowed to study it. Nikola Tesla was tapping into it. What you will divulge on the ether.
the ether is the stuff of space, the actual structure of space, and it's gas and protons and electrons and plasma and electricity and critters that have evolved to feed on it.
What are these critters that have evolved to feed on it?
They look like giant jellyfish mostly. Some of them look like amoebas. Some of them will, they almost look like angels. And the ones that look like angels can talk to you in your head. They're really disturbing. They want you to leave the ship and go out where they can eat you.
Okay. How would these things eat you? They have a mouth, they'll just crush you, or like they suck your life out, or
They suck your life out.
are
More
these
like
the same?
more like amoeba. These are not beings with physical bodies like ours. They're more beings of light, and they'll just suck you in and there's they dissolve you.
Are these the same creatures that when you went into hyperspace, they would latch on to the ass end, and you'd have to shake them off every now and then to spoil the milk? You would say.
Yes, yes. There's lots of them out there.
So these are them. You'd say they look like big manta rays, just keeping up with the
Some
ship.
of them do.
Do they get more sophisticated the faster you go? Like only the big ones can hang? Is that why?
I think it depends on what part of space you're in. They're all out there, and but different places have different concentrations.
Okay.
But yeah, they're life forms. They're not stuck in one spot, but they seem to have territories.
Penny, if we were to dry up all the Earth's oceans for a day and could go explore, what kind of shit would we see?
We would see ships. We would see ancient cities. We would see all the stuff that the Smithsonian has dumped out there. Currently, we would see all the trash because so many cities are just dumping bales of trash into the ocean. Um, there are floating almost islands of plastics
Well, not to sit and minimize those, but if we could expound upon the ancient cities, one, and two, you said Smithsonian dumps stuff out there. What would they dump, and what ancient cities, if you could expound on a couple?
Uh, I don't know what humans today would call them, but I know in legends it would be Lemuria and Atlantis, and those were not single cities. Those were labels applied to parts of the ocean where civilization is much older than we've been told. And every time there's a disaster or an ice age, it rebuilds. And so we reach a certain point, and there's a place in Earth's orbit where meteorites come from the Taurus system. That's the direction of space they come from. And these meteorites come and they'll just trash everything. And then humanity has to rebuild. There's a cyclic thing where the west coast of the United States is shoved under the Pacific Ocean, and that's a cyclic thing, and we're actually overdue for that one. And there are ETs who come, and when we get too big for our britches, they push us back to the Stone Age on purpose. And folks need to know about that. Um, they are waiting for us to mature enough to be good galactic citizens. And until we have, they won't let us really be out there.
What ETs and how do they push us back to the Stone Age?
What ETs would be the folks in the core of the galaxy?
These are the oldest then and the wisest. They make up this thing that you've given your testimony to out by Jupiter.
Yes.
Okay, so these are these galactic
These
guardians or something, or
we know them well. They told me they were the Galactic Authority, and their military police are called the Guardians. And when we get out there and we're enslaving everybody and we're killing worlds and we're generally being a pain in the ass, they will come and we will experience what's called a solar flash.
ah,
And the solar flash will fry everything on the side of the planet that's facing the sun. And usually the fires will reach all the way around the planet. And so you're hearing people talking about the solar flash is coming. So people people are psychically aware that we're getting in trouble out there because of time travel. The Germans have been out there for 400 years. And so the Guardians are getting tired of this. So they've already started pushing the Germans back into the solar system. So when you look at the photographs of ships coming out of the sun, those are German ships. They're bringing refugees back into the solar system. And instead of settling them on Earth, they're being settled in the Oort cloud.
what is set up in the Oort cloud so that these refugees can be settled?
Some of these larger planetoids are being hollowed out and turned into subterranean worlds. And there will be lots of people in those. The the Guardians have told me when I did testimony that they are starting with who is furthest out and pushing everybody back here. And that once we are all back inside the Oort cloud that will be sealed off until we can learn to live together in peace. Nobody in, nobody out. We'll be allowed to play in the solar system, and that's it.
With the last couple minutes we have left, just under 4 minutes, if you could please speak to things like I know it's cliche as hell, but Dulce, Area 51, just their anatomy and their structure, and I'm sure they might be derelict and old now. I don't know, but I'm sure the deeper you go, the more high tech, if you will, they are, and what they connect to, old earth tunnels or dug tunnels by taxpayer dollars. If we could just talk about this network of deep underground military bases, starting with the two most famous, perhaps.
Okay, Dulce is actually a base for the big-nosed grays, and they have been given access to Americans to eat in exchange for biomedical research. And I blew up the base in 2016 and 2017, I'm sorry. And the Air Force had it rebuilt within 2 years. So this is a military approved base, and they are doing some of the most horrific crap that I've ever seen.
I've heard there's something called Nightmare Hall, and people like Steve Quayle, I don't know if he's a credible guy to you, but said that they would splice things like an octopus and a guy together, just make these chimeras that were sentient, and it's all just to be thrown in vats and decomposed so that these grays that eat their skin can suck them up, all their glandular secretions. I get my information from Phil Schneider and Steve Quayle. I don't know if it's all bullshit.
Phil Schneider was pretty much on. I don't know who Steve Quayle is.
Okay, don't worry about
it. Remote viewing it. I don't exactly remote view. I'm more bilocate, and I would be ill looking in on the place. It's horrid. It's not someplace. I mean, President Carter declared war on it once in back when he was president. So it's been a long time, and they've done some horrific things for a long time, and yet the Air Force is keeping them there. I don't know what's going on at Area 51. I have not tried to look in. I do know there are underground tunnels that go back to each of the ice ages over the last 40,000 years.
Danny, it's about to cut you off. I'm sorry to cut you off. You want to pick up and do a round 3, and then, or you want to schedule next week, or?
We can schedule for next week.
Okay, I'll reach out to you Monday first thing, okay?
Okay.
Real quick, do I have permission to post these?
Yes.
Okay. All right, Penny. I'm gonna text you Monday morning.
Okay.
Okay.